Welcome to our third episode of Qatar World Cup special. In our first episode, we looked at the World Cup and the stock market predictions. In our second episode, we looked at the World Cup, the finance, the soccer, and the numbers. And this week, we're gonna be looking at the world of football, soccer, and the politics of things. So hopefully you will find them informative and interesting. So let's start with soccer and politics. And it's a vast world out there. And in our today's episode, what we're going to look at, I'm going to emphasize the geopolitics, although there is racism with soccer, there's sexism in soccer, there's corruption definitely in soccer. And being involved with emerging markets, I always say if you want to understand developing economies, just look at FIFA, the whole politics of FIFA, and that brings us to the corruption. Now, it's interesting enough that when we look at Qatar's World Cup, you basically have every one of these elements. At least that's how the impression has been, whether it's about the racism and immigrant workers, whether it's the sexism and, as far as discrimination and the world of women, whether it's the corruption, the way the whole thing started. So these are the perception. Of course, the geopolitics play a big role. So will be the emphasis of this session, because this is such a vast subject that we can go on for hours and hours. So before I start, I thought, usually we do this at the end. Let's look at some of the resources that I have and I've used besides, the past, 45 years of my own experiences. So I thought, let's start with that. And one of my favorite all-time soccer-related books is a book called Soccer Against the Enemy, and how the world's most popular sport starts at fuel revolutions and keeps dictators in power. Now, this is a revised one. It was in April of 2020. I got the first version, or the old version was I got the 2011, and it is a fascinating story. If you like exciting, it's almost like a James Bond movie in a sense. So I would really encourage you to read this book if you like a good read. This is by Simon Cooper, a great analyst writer. He worked with Financial Times, lived in South Africa, a Dutch heritage. It's a great read. Another book he's written and with Stefan Szymanski. This one I haven't, it just came out October 2022. I have the original one from the 2009 and the Socceronomics at that time, but this one is fascinating. It's been updated. So I would encourage you again, it just came out. I haven't read it yet, but it is, it should be very interesting. The other resources, if you have a chance, the history of soccer, the beautiful game, is fascinating. Looking back at the whole history of the World Cup, but as well as other things, and it really looks at the politics of things. Also, there's a book by Tamir Baran that it's a Beyond Soccer. So besides that, BCA Research does things that reviews their resources. There is Goldman Sachs. So these are some of the resources that you could use, and I encourage you if you like a good read. So, starting up politics, and I mentioned Qatar, we talked about geopolitics. I'd like to start our conversation looking at the game that it will happen on November 29th between Iran and USA. And why is that? Is because in 1998, that's the first time the two teams met, especially what had happened in 1979 after the Iran's revolution and the hostages being taken. It was, according to Guardian, and he puts down Great Satan, in essence, looking at what the Iranian government would call the United States. Iran won that game 2-1, and Guardian announced it the most politically charged match in the World Cup history. So basically, that's what it was. In 1998, France, it was one of the most watched, and it was really, there's a lot of neutral people who really wanted to watch this game. So basically, what happened in that game was, again, the game was billed as the most politically charged game in the football history. But the interesting thing is the tension actually began to flare right before the kickoff. Now, the idea was what's going to happen within the two teams. By the way, Iran won. That was their first win in the World Cup. So that was the game. So the FIFA regulation says that the players in team categorized as Team B, which was Iran, have to walk up to Team A players and shake their hands in the middle of the pitch. Now, here we are, however, the Supreme Leader Khamenei had given express orders that the Iranian team, which is the Team B in this match, were not to walk up to the Americans. So what do? Eventually, a compromise was reached, and the US broke that FIFA protocol by walking up to the Iranian team to shake hands. In exchange, the Iranian team handed white flowers to the American players, a symbol of peace. And the team took their pre-game picture, which we saw in a couple of slides ago, in what many described as one of the greatest acts of rapprochement between the two nations since the 1979 Iranian Revolution. So here we are, Iran and the United States again are in the same group with England and Wales into 2022 Qatar World Cup. And on November 29, these two teams will play each other. This is for the second time, obviously. Now, President Biden will certainly hope that a repeat of 1998, maybe once again, pull the two nations closer together at the time that really both countries remain at odds, obviously because of nuclear negotiations. And after all, the renewed deal would alleviate some of the pressures in the oil market, increasing the Democrats' chance of retaining the White House in 2024. But it is unlikely. It seems like the 2022 will offer not the same opportunity for diplomacy as 1998 did. And however, what is clear is that once again, the political developments have made their way onto the football pitch. And during a friendly game with Senegal, for instance, in September, Iranian players covered up their national symbols to show their support against the repression of the women in Iran. As you know, from September 16th on, it's been almost 2 months. There has been uprising, especially with the youth, young students, women, and they really do not want to wear the headscarf, the hijab. And there's this is like the biggest threat really to the government since 2009, and it's been ongoing. Now, there has been some soccer players who really voiced their opposition, the symbolism. And so here we have Sardar Azmoun, who plays for Bayern Leverkusen, and has been particularly vocal about it, willing to risk being banned from the national team. Now, the recent protests, the most significant in Iran since 2009, should provide an interesting wrinkle in the eve of match between these two geopolitical rivals. Now, this writing comes from the VSA research. I will add more, Ali Karimi, which was one of the biggest idols of Iranian national team. He played for Bayern Munich. He's been very outspoken. I believe he moved, he's in Dubai right now, but he's been very outspoken. Another thing, just a few days ago, there was the international tournament of beach football in Dubai, and Iran beat Brazil 2-1, and they became the champions of the Asian Americans. So one thing that the whole team did, they did not sing the national anthem. So by the time they got home, they were actually at the airport, they were threatened. So the winning goal actually came from, in this case, was Said Piramun, and what he did, the symbolism is of cutting the hair, and obviously he's been told that he will be dealt with when he gets back home. So you can see the tensions actually, and we shall see what will happen. Right now, some of the Iranian players who play, for instance, in Europe, they do not celebrate their goals. So that will be a facet of this game, not only just against the United States. We shall see how the players are going to behave during the national anthem. Even some people are looking at the flag, and as far as even the fans. Now, one of the things we want to, again, this is from the BCA research, is the unfavorable views on foreign adversaries for the United States. So you can see the China in green. It's been pretty steady, and of course in past year, and of course in the past 3 years or so, 4 years, because of the trade and other things and the COVID, the unfavorably have gone much higher. Of course, Russia, which was not, half and half, of course, because of the Ukraine, has really gone to the roof, almost 90%. But Iran has been steady unfavorable, above 80. So that's what's going on. So Iran has always been from the radars of the way people are looking at the government, by the way, not the people of Iran. That's what has been the unfavorability. So I want to start with that because it is the most recent, and it's going to be the most political event in this, in my opinion, this Qatar World Cup. So I thought, let's have a journey and go back in the history of the soccer and the World Cup, and look at some of the incidents that has happened that really have its roots in the geopolitical and sometimes in the nationalism versus globalism, and what has happened. So let's start with World Cup 1934, and which is in Italy. And now the question was, did Italy fix the World Cup qualifier to make Benito Mussolini, the fascist, the dictator of Italy, happy by winning the tournament? So Benito, he was not stupid, and he was a very big fan of physical activities. He had done rugby and swimming and a lot of other sports. He was short in stature. Some people say he was about 5 foot tall. So that was really important for him, and he knew that the soccer, the sport, will unite the Italian community and people. So the victories in 1934, 1936, and 1988 went some ways towards the uniting the Italian people behind a single national cause. And it was astute of Mussolini in this situation. And some people don't say he didn't care about soccer. He liked the sports, but it wasn't. But he used it as a tool that you could see that the public support was very much attainable through this beautiful sport. And that was the reason, again, he had that unity, and obviously the World War II happened and he had that behind him. So he used soccer as a tool. So looking at that and talking about manipulations and other things, we come back to Argentina in 1978, and it's called in some ways the dirtiest World Cup of all time. Now, what happened, it was in the middle of a military government. It was a really ugly period in Argentinian history, and that's one of the most amazing World Cups that I remember. I was a young man, and I remember that truly I was a Dutch fan, and never forget that what happened over time with Mario Kempes. Now, what I want to pay attention is, this is in 1978, there were black bands around the goalposts, and every goalpost, and we did not realize what it was till almost 40 years later. It was in about 2017 that finally it was clear what these black marks were on the goalposts. So let's go back in the history and see what happened in 1978. So in June 1978, Argentina was ruled by a murderous military junta. And that was a military government. And by the time the World Cup finals, the junta had disappeared thousands of Argentinians. Said about 30,000 Argentinians disappeared into clandestine torture centers. And some of them, they never got recovered. So at that time, Argentinian manager, Cesar Luis Menotti, he guided his confused players through this moral maze before the final, advising them not to win for the junta. And junta wanted this symbolism to show to the world that they're the best in the world. They knew how powerful the soccer and the passion is, and they wanted to win at any cost. And so he wanted his players to win for the metal workers, the butchers, the bakers, and the taxi drivers, and who filled the stadium. Now, everyone knew someone who knew someone that had been disappeared. The staff all wanted to protest. By now, the mothers were marching in Plaza de Mayo, and they knew that the world was watching. We discussed cutting a message into the grass or painting a message on that was something that TV cameras would see. So the idea was a person who remembers those, this is a quote from him. So the only thing they could think of without violating as far as the regulations of FIFA was having those black marks, and that was a word of unity. Now, I want to share about three things. Number one, some people say Johan Cruyff, the captain of Holland, who was really one of my heroes. I was a huge Ajax fan in 1970. I loved the Holland team in 1974 when they played in Germany. And it was a beautiful football, 1971, 72, 73 Ajax. It was just a magnificent team. And so some people say Johan Cruyff did not go to 1978 World Cup, which he was really needed, because of humanitarian reasons. He could see there was a murderous government in charge of Argentina. So that's one tidbit. The second tidbit is told that, I'm going to go to next, and this was Jorge Rafael Videla was the general who got into power in 1976, was in power until 1981. He died in 2013. And as I mentioned, there was almost under him, so many people disappeared. So he actually had threatened the team that they had to win. They had to beat Holland if they wanted to survive. So that's also, there's rumors, maybe even Holland was threatened that if they did not lose. We don't know, but that was part of the conversation. The third thing, I go back to Cesar Luis Menotti. He was in 1978 the manager. He became the most popular person after winning the World Cup because he was a voice of freedom. He was socialist leaning, and as I mentioned, he wanted the right of the people. And he could have been dead if he was not involved with the soccer, but because of his winning, obviously the government could not do against him. So the personal story I have is about 7 years ago. I was lecturing at actually local university, Chapman University, here in Orange County, California. And it was an MBA class, finance class. And this young lady came to me, and she was from Argentina. And we were talking about business of football and the markets. And she goes, do you know my uncle coached the Argentinian football team? I said, really? When was that? And she goes, in 1970s, and they won the World Cup. Come to find out, here is in Orange County, California, the niece of Cesar Luis Menotti was studying, and it was in the class. So it was really heartwarming, and we just had a nice chat. So that was, such a small world, and here we are. So again, here's a dictatorship ruling the outcome of a game. And talking about the outcome, now there has been this rumor, if you remember in 1978, in order for Argentina to finals, they had to win by 4-goal difference. And again, there was a group, it was a very strange World Cup, and it started in 1974. They didn't have this, they had to go to group stages after the initial group stages. And in order for Brazil to be eliminated in a sense, Argentina had to win by 4 goals, and they were playing against Peru. So finally, in 2013, this is the headline, the Peru senator claims that 1978 World Cup game against Argentina against Peru was rigged. So here's the story. Again, Argentina were the host nation, obviously in 1978, and they were on the way to the 3rd place playoff against Italy, with Brazil progressing to the final game, because again, Argentina had to win by 4. So Peru had a strong team, and they had Teofilo Cubillas, one of the best goal scorers and great players, and so how could they beat Peru by more than 4 goals? So again, they qualified with Holland. Actually, the Holland was in the group. Holland and Peru were in the group of Scotland and Iran at that time, and they had only just conceded only 6 goals in the whole tournament, and here they had to lose by 4 goals. Well, Argentina ran out 6-0 winners against Peru in a match which was shrouded in a controversy until, again, the former senator, who was, Mr. Ledesma, he told Daily Mail, and I believe this was in 2013, if I'm not mistaken, that the Buenos Aires, he talked to the Buenos Aires judge, that who issued an order of arrest against former Peruvian military president Francisco Bermudez. So what was the deal? Again, Huanta, the military government wanted, obviously there's a military government in Peru, again, talking about corruptions. So what the question was, or the thought was, that he is accused of illegally sending 13 Peruvian citizens to Argentina as a part of the so-called Condor Plan, through which Latin American dictatorships in the 1970s cooperated in the repression of political dissidents. Once inside Argentina, the prisoners were tortured by the brutal military regime and forced to sign false confessions. Now, Mr. Ledesma, an opposition leader at that time, claims Argentinian dictator Jorge Videla only accepted the political prisoners on condition that the Peru deliberately lost the World Cup match, and by enough goals to ensure Argentina progress to the final. He said in court, Videla needed to win the World Cup to cleanse Argentina's bad image around the world. And this is, again, the beautiful game having disdain. That's why it's called one of the ugliest or the dirtiest World Cups in the history. Now, going back before 1978, there was an old saying in Europe. It was said that if you have one Argentinian player, then you have a great team. If you have 2 Argentinian players, then you have a half a team. If you have 3 Argentinian players, then you have no team. And what Cesar Menotti tried to do with his team, because they had a common goal, and it was not because of the glory of military government, they wanted to really save the people and give them hope. And that's why they became united, and that's how it was won. Although, again, there's rumors that the Holland team was, they were threatened, so I don't know about that. Staying in Argentina, I'm going to go back to late 1940s and 1950. Now, you're probably all familiar with Eva Perón, and of course, Juan Perón was again, it was a popular leader, supposedly people's leader, a dictatorship president, and of course, after his passing, of course, Evita or Eva Perón became president. And one interesting thing was Perón was knew the power of, again, soccer or football. He was immensely popular with the Boca Juniors, and Boca Juniors, remember, they are the people's team, and their stadium is in a poor side of the Buenos Aires, and then you have the River Plate, which is the elite team outside, 25 minutes outside Buenos Aires. So he knew the people's power. So it was a Boca Juniors, and as a matter of fact, fans regularly chanted Boca, Perón, Una, Corazon, and you can see as a sign of his popularity. Now, Perón was shrewd. He saw the potential of football as a vehicle for political advancement. So attendances for football matches in Buenos Aires were at all-time high during his tenure as president, and Perón became aware that the football stadium was a perfect arena for which he could promote his ideas of social mobility and nationalism. Now, considering direct involvement of the Peronist regime in football, it's surprising to note that Argentina national side did not travel to the Copa America in 1949 or the World Cup a year later. Now, the reason for this was simple. Perón actually pulled the national team coach before 1950, and he said, what are the chances of us winning the World Cup? And he did not get the guaranteed or the assurance that they're going to win the World Cup in 1950. And if you remember 1950, Brazil, and so he did not want his footballers to risk losing, which he would have regarded as a national calamity. It was the domain of the club football where Perón shaped the political and football landscape. Now we move forward to 1970, and there is a title of something called the Football War, and this happened in the 1969. The qualification in Mexico, and it was El Salvador versus Honduras. The neighbors of Salvador is much larger than Honduras, and the El Salvador team ahead of the that was the population deciding match against Honduras, and this is the picture in June 1969. So what happened? In 1969, El Salvador, Honduras fought a 4-day conflict that cost thousands of lives and displaced thousands more. They said about 300,000 people were displaced after this bloody, really struggle for days. And remembered as it's called again, Football War. It was 2-2, the game, after 90 minutes in Azteca Stadium in Mexico City. This was the third game between Honduras and El Salvador in as many weeks. Qualification was for the 1970 World Cup in Mexico, and that was at stake. And competition neither country had ever competed in before. So Honduras won the first leg, 1-0 in their capital, Tegucigalpa, and only for El Salvador to come back, and they won 3-0 at home in San Salvador. And then the force of violence marred both games. So as a deciding match, which was the third match, entered in the 11th minute of extra time, again in Azteca, El Salvador's Mauricio Pipo Rodriguez sprinted into penalty area to meet a cross, and he passed Honduran goalkeeper. Anyway, so they won. When he says, when I scored the goal, I thought it's not possible with so little time left for them to draw with us, or Rodriguez says, 50 years after the critical match. I was sure with the goal we would win. So El Salvador held on to triumph 3-2. The players hugged, shook hands, and left the pitch. And within 3 weeks, their countries were at war. So another thing about, again, the politics of this beautiful game. Now, Pele, which I have more respect for him, the greatest player. I had seen him in person, sat with him in 1994, but I saw him when I was about 11 or 12 years old when he came to my country, played for Santos, beat the hell out of our national B team 5-1, and then saw him again in the 1980s, and the third time I was privileged to see him again. Now, he is, some people, is the greatest player. Now, interesting thing is he was said that he was monitored by Brazil's military dictatorship. He was one of the most biggest idols of sports in the 20th century. So the documents released by Brazilian authorities show that the military officials kept track of Pelé during the country's dictatorship era. The files unveiled by Sao Paulo state government on Monday show officials investigated Pelé in the 1970s, keeping record of his activities and probing incidents involving the football star, including alleged attacks to his home in the coastal city of Santos. So the military dictatorship ruled Brazil from 1964 to 1985, with officials constantly trying to identify possible opponents to their regime and vehemently acting to reprimand radical leftists. Pelé had already been linked to military dictatorship investigations after he allegedly received a manifest requesting his help to try and influence the release of political prisoners. Now, the documents on Pelé were among several files on well-known Brazilians released online by the state government. Now, recently Netflix had a documentary on Pelé, and it is said that there are some of actually his co-players and some of his, some other oppositions to the government felt that Pelé could have done a lot. He stayed neutral, and they were hoping with his popularity, he could have really just a one man, and which became a national memorial in a sense. Well, it was like 1964, I believe, because the government didn't want to lose him. They didn't want him to leave, so they declared him a national monument, really. So, but the question is, they asked him why he didn't do more, and he said he was neutral, his door was always open. And so, but he has been kind of, again, there are some co-players that they thought he could have done a lot more. So I want to look at the other side of things and how dangerous it can be to play football and how your life is in danger. Now, during the Saddam Hussein's era, of course, he had two sons. They're both crazy, but in this case, Uday was the craziest of all. He, again, finally was killed during the Iraq invasion. But during the Saddam Hussein's Iraq, soccer players who lost a game were tortured until they won. Now, there was like players joke that they had three homes: the field, their actual houses, and Uday's prison. Some of these prisons were actually these little tiny little it's almost like a single cells in a sense, and there would be nails, and they could be tortured right in that, and there would be solitary, and there would be a lot of again just the fear, and so there's a lot of stories regarding that as well. One of the things I didn't just want to talk about, like the Argentinian team which won 1978, they were the government made sure that none of the players played overseas. They had to be from Argentina. They didn't want to lose. They had total control. The only player they had out of the 22 was the Mario Kempes, who played for Valencia at that time. There was the only foreign club player that didn't play obviously in Argentina, and that was Mario Kempes. So I want to finish by this, and I thought this was really interesting. Again, this is from Simon Cooper and Stefan Ziminski. And so they wrote, as I mentioned, that Soccernomics, and they updated it. As I say, I've read the 2009 version, but they just did the 2022, which I'm really definitely interested reading. So I want to verbatim to read this to you because I really found it fascinating. Now, this is from them. Every few years since we first published Soccernomics in 2009, the two of us rewrite and update the whole book. We've just done it again ahead of the World Cup in Qatar. Cynics might accuse us of taking out wrong predictions and putting in new ones. But there is one prediction we made that was so wrong that it pushed us to rethink how global soccer works. Briefly, why hasn't the rest of the world caught up with Western Europe? In 2009, we looked at the crazy dominance of Western European nations at the 2006 World Cup and thought, this can't last. A region with about 5% of the world's population cannot keep dominating the global game. Countries elsewhere would simply copy and overtake the Western Europeans, we thought. So we subtitled that the first edition, Why the US, Japan, Australia, Turkey, and even Iraq are destined to become the kings of the world's most popular sport. Well, go on, laugh at us. 13 years later, none of these countries look kings-like. To the contrary, heading into the World Cup, Western Europe is unprecedentedly dominant. Since 2006, its teams have won 4 straight World Cups, something no continent had managed before. 2 of those trophies were won outside Europe, something no European team had managed before. Better continental Europeans, including Croatia, a bike ride from Western Europe, hugged 11 of the 12 first, second, and third places at the World Cups in this period. Also notice that region's depth, 7 different European countries have reached the top 3. What makes Western Europe unbeatable in soccer? Quite simply, ideas exchange within the continent. Now, I say this because we're talking about the football, but again, you can go culture and look at the world in emerging and developing countries as well, and why this is important. So this region has the world's most porous borders. The French, Germans, English, Dutch, etc., each think just a little differently about soccer, and they swap ideas almost daily. Often this happens through match play. After Italy beat England or Villarreal beat Bayern Munich, the losers go home and work out what the winners did better. Often the ideas are carried by individuals, players or coaches who migrate between European leagues, like Liverpool's German coach Jurgen Klopp, Manchester City Catalan coach Pep Guardiola, or Real Madrid's Italian Carlo Ancelotti. And so Western European soccer evolves almost weekly. The best teams play ever faster, more organized soccer with new winning tactics, such as Italian and German forward pressing. Even the biggest national teams outside Europe are excluded from this ideas exchange. The US, say, cannot learn the world's best soccer playing qualifying games against Panama or Costa Rica. Its teenagers won't learn it in high schools or soccer academies separated by thousands of miles from leading European teams. By the time the best North American, Asian, or African players arrive in Europe, aged about 20, they're often too late to catch up. So longer term, the dominance of a single region still looks unsustainable. But then we called catch up once before, and we were wrong. All that we'll now say is that it will happen one day, but we no longer specifying which century. So with that in mind, I thought leave it on that note because you can see again there is a difference, and it is the politics, is the economics, but at the end it's about sharing, it's about enjoying the beautiful game. Now, one thing I have to say, there's so much depth. I mean, if you read The Enemy Within, there's a lot of things that we can go on. And again, interest of time, I just wanted to show you different facets of this beautiful, the most popular game, and how the leaders, they can use it. Unfortunately, it has been used wrongly, but it also could build up. It can bring the whole world together, this beautiful sports. So in this, again, episode, I didn't go and didn't talk about, for instance, the games like Holland and Germany, for instance, in this Imagine after World War II, that the scenarios or the games that they've had against each other. We didn't talk about England, Scotland rivalry. We really didn't focus on, for instance, the latest one, Russia, Ukraine, and how Russia has paid a big price for what they have done. So those are, I mean, you can just see, you can taste it, you can see how the World Cup happened, just the recent, the qualifications. So it is very much intermingled, the people's passion, the politics, you cannot separate them. And we can do the politics with the clubs, whether it's the Celtics and Rangers, and it can go on, and when you think about Africa. But at the end of the game, it is the most popular sport, it's the most beautiful sport, and I hope it will be used for the peace rather than one small group to their own benefit. With that in mind, I thank you for your attention attending this session, and I wish you a wonderful World Cup in Qatar. Thank you.